Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Just like to start with an acknowledgement of country. We're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Just like to acknowledge their elders, past and present, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Today, we're really lucky to have Mathew Ling in here today. I feel like normally I'd give a little bit of a bio, but I think this talk is going to be a little bit about your academic life and stuff. But what I will say is Mathew was a lecturer at Deakin University. He founded up the Misinformation Lab, I think, and had various forms of success in the academy, but now has transitioned into industry where he works as a research and evaluation lead at Niami National, which I think you're going to hear about today. So join me in welcoming Mathew. Thanks.
Thanks, Manika. Thank you all. I'm always very privileged to be invited to talk, which happens way more than I ever expected it would. I will note that when I originally had a conversation with Andy about this talk and I pitched this idea, it took me about 30 seconds to start having grave misgivings about this, because this kind of title and this kind of talk always goes deeply into the gratuitous and self-indulgent. So what I'd really appreciate to help me deal with that is for you to all channel your inner emeritus professors and treat me as like the honours student at their first ever conference, and just interrupt at any point with any questions, no matter how targeted, because that will help me feel a little bit better about doing a talk about me, which just seems a bit rude, really. Okay. Yes, as kind of on the slide, we're going to give it a little bit of a self-indulgent talk about my path through the academy, and then out and into a job now at Niami National. And yeah, the name is disgustingly unintuitive to pronounce. Everyone pronounces it different ways, including people that are employed currently by Niami. Of course, it's not going to advance the slide. There we go. That's right. Cool. All right. So I'm going to dip in and out of this a little bit as we go through, for reasons that will hopefully become clear. So in my past life, I was an academic. I was a lecturer in psychology at Deakin University for a number of years, with a focus in social psych, originally into individual differences, and then post my PhD, developing this emphasis into misinformation and individual susceptibility to misinformation, which was a deep passion of mine because I come from like a medical family, and I always had bugbears around vaccine hesitancy, but that seemed really, 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 precognitive in the context of what happened over the last couple of years with QAnon vaccine hesitance, COVID vaccine hesitancy, what happened in the US with the stop the steal and all these sort of things. Really, we kind of nailed it there. So I founded the Misinformation Lab with Emily Cothey, who's pictured in the middle of there. These are a bunch of our honours students and two of our colleagues, all of whom have gone on to complete their degrees and do amazing things. Complete your degrees, do amazing things. That's the nod to the supervisors in the room. And I also was involved in the formation of ANZON, which is the Australian New Zealand Open Research Network, and AMOS, which is the Association for Interdisciplinary Meta Research and Open Science. I know Fiona's in the room and she would shoot me if I didn't contribute to, make sure I didn't contribute to the misapprehension of it being an Australian organization, which it is not. It's an international society that you should all be a member of and join. Aside from this research thing, I also did a lot of teaching. It was an overwhelming proportion of what I did as an academic. We spent a lot of time teaching research methods, personality psych, and later first year psych. And then I was a all-round R and open science annoying person in my department. We're just going for the wheel. All right, now I work. Now I work at Nemai National. Nemai, does anyone know Nemai at all? One person, excellent, that's normal. Nemai is a national mental health and homelessness service provider. We operate services in Victoria, everywhere except Tasmania, ACT. That's basically it. We operate in all the other states and Northern Territory. We operate within this thing which we call the Collaborative Relational Practice Framework, which is our model of care and how we engage in practice. Apparently in 2021, 2022, this is a cursed piece of knowledge. We serve something like 30,000 and more consumers. And we're predominantly funded by state and federal government. So we don't do fee-for-service services in general or anything like that. What typically happens is we get some funding from the federal government or state government department to deliver a type of service, and we deliver that service sometimes in our own name, but quite frequently in the context of the brands that the funder provides. So you may have heard about the local mental health and wellbeing services that the Victorian government has funded, otherwise known as Vic Locals. We have a number of those that we are going to be delivering, one in Whittlesea and one in Latrobe Valley. And the Head to Health services, which are popping up all over the place, we got a number of those pilot sites. So again, those are examples of the types of services that Nemai operates. Even though you've probably not heard of Nemai, you have possibly heard of a Nemai service. What I do in the context of research and evaluation at Nemai is like a whole bunch of different things. So it's not entirely unlike what happens in the context of the academy, where you do just one job. It feels like one job more than happens in the academy. But what I am doing is working across still a number of different things. Now, I've tried to give a picture of research and evaluation as a suite, because our team is kind of big, not quite this big, but still big in the standards of having one overall manager. So we do things like service evaluation projects, trying to understand how a service has been been implemented or what outcomes it's having. We'll do evidence summaries to support planning what types of services we should deliver and how we should deliver them, basically literature reviews. We'll do internal research. So we've got here pictured, I'm going to put my cursor shot, there's this document here about this Y-Flex practice approach, which is a document trying to unpick exactly what it is one of our services does and articulate that in a really clear and accessible document, but it's comprehensive and rigorous. Or we also do research to underpin whether we are integrating lived experience in our work and how that's and what the barriers are to that. A lot of what I'm doing more of is this operational data or service monitoring. As with any service that's anywhere, you will routinely collect a lot of data just in the course of delivering that service. And we're trying to make sure that that data just doesn't go to the funder or sit in a hole somewhere, but instead gets pushed back to the services to help them understand what's going on. And also, I'm very keen on trying to work out how we can engage with other research partners and other organizations to kind of get a better picture of what we're doing, have better reach in our research. And also, my biggest role I find is to provide general purpose cynicism. Go into the room full of people that are very, very ardently convinced that they're doing the right thing for the right reasons and trying really hard, and be deliberately and painfully cynical so we can make sure that we're actually doing the right things for the right people at the right times, etc. So in practice, what do? I am a research and evaluation lead B. That's because there are two of us, and for some reason they needed to give us a appellation. I personally manage and develop a team of 4. Each of these are various and magical individual creatures with diverse backgrounds that are very, very, very much unlike mine. So we've got a design researcher who has a design and a research background. We've got someone with a traditional social psych research background, or we've got 2 people with no formal education post-secondary school and one without a completed secondary school education, both of whom are my data wizards. They know more about SQL than I will ever know. One of them knows more about Power BI and Excel than I will ever want to know. But they overall, this group of people support all of the things that I'm notionally responsible for. I oversee a lot of research and evaluation projects, which we'll speak to a little bit later. But I spend a lot of time doing advocacy for and with consumer data, taking the data we've got and trying to make it make sense, both to our teams, but also to our funders and to other people who might have a stake in it, like departments. We do a lot of development of one-off or routine reports. So this morning, while I've been sitting upstairs, I've been asked for some dumb data extracts for media requests or not a dumb request to make sure that we're maintaining our data quality. So I've been running some external extracts for one of our services. And I do a lot of liaising with internal and external stakeholders, which I've put in quotes because you've 100% seen this in a PD, and many of you will wonder what that is. That means that I have a lot of calendar days that look like that. And we can speak a little bit to that if you have targeted questions about what that looks like later. I can tell you that it's definitely something I did not have a clear understanding of when I was in your shoes. And I didn't really have a clear understanding of it until at least a couple of months into having this role, where now I would say it is the biggest part of my role. I also put Isaiah Act up as required, which means that, you know, when my boss takes leave, which things happen, people take leave, they actually accrue and discharge their leave allowances on normal balances. Magical. It's amazing. You never thought it would happen. I sometimes have to be the senior manager, which is fun and terrible because there are other worse meetings for me to attend as senior manager. My day-to-day looks like this. I sit in my front room with my laptop and my ergonomic chair and my weird keyboard and such, and I stare out at my front garden and I do 2 to 8 meetings a day. Some days I get a nice bit of run and I end up spending some of my time writing a report, working on some analytics, which is fun. I would say that, you know, that's about 60% of the time I'll get any amount of time to open R and do some analytics. Some days it's cursed, like today, and I have to open R and do SQL, which I hate because I'm not good at. I have lots of different projects on the go. Like, so I'll have a couple of evaluation things going on. I'll have a couple of ad hoc requests going on. I might have, again, some structured projects, etc. But really what I find, again, the big theme is the value add is going into services or talking to services and turning over rocks and shining torches in dark corners. Things that people don't know to look at or know how to look at, because somehow this is the skill that we develop that we just don't realize. And that is one of the great convertible skills. So I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about a few things that, again, kind of confused or surprised me or have been really useful in contextualizing what's different in things that are common from my work as an academic and now my work as a research and evaluation lead in EMI. So the first thing is meetings. So in universities, a meeting comprises of a group of people with approximately equivalent experience and qualifications. They sit in a room or sit in a Zoom call for at least an hour, and then after that absolutely nothing happens. The amount of teaching and learning meetings that I've been in where there has been a meeting that has gone on for an hour, people have complained incessantly about the same problems that they've been complaining about every single one of these other meetings, and at the end of that meeting we all agree that that was a real frustrating thing that we've had to deal with, and we will come back next month and do the same meeting again. Yeah. From my experience, what happens in my industry job, at least, a meeting comprises of a group of people with different expertise and experience. I'll go into a meeting. I am the only academic-ish person, academic-shaped person in that room. There are lawyers, there are service provision people, there are HR consultants, there are learning and development people, there are finance people. The meeting lasts half an hour by default. That's the default meeting time in our Outlook schedule. That's why I can have 8 meetings a day and not die all of the time. And then decisions are made in that meeting and things change. That is an astonishing difference that I did not appreciate. I was thinking I hate meetings, and I tried to explain this to my wife as to why I have so many meetings and I don't hate it as much. This is one of the biggest changes that I can recommend about the academy, about leaving the academy rather. Another note is on data. So in universities, your context, you know this, you design the study painstakingly, very carefully, you work out exactly what you need to measure, you measure that very carefully, you administer that measurement protocol with an exacting protocol. If you need other people to be involved, you train them rigorously, you give them all of the tools and they nail it, right? Minimum number of variation components. The reality is, for my context, what we have is a funder designs a general data structure for the services they're offering right now. And then in 5 to 10 years, they offer 6 more services, and they've extrapolated this dumb data set to all of those other services that they all have to kind of shoehorn themselves into, and it doesn't fit. They give it to providers like Nemi or like Mind or like any of the others. They implement that data collection in whichever software they can manage to make it work. And then they get hundreds of individual end users to collect that data. And so, again, one of the big changes here is we've gone for an environment where data is painful at the front because you do all the work to set it up, but data is less painful at the end on the most part. It can be disappointing, but not, it's not painful because it's structured. Data in the wild is nuts, and it's horrific in ways that you couldn't imagine. You, again, learn regex. It's amazing. It saves your life so much. So this is a bit of a cut for the older members of the audience. You may be asking yourself, how did I get here? So this is a brief timeline of my career, where I did my PhD. You can see that my PhD went on a little bit longer than it should have. That's the yellow shaded area. And then I took on my work as an academic. And then I had a vision that it would continue forever, because on paper, I love teaching students. I love explaining concepts to people. And I love answering, questions that people haven't thought about very rigorously. That's kind of what I love doing. We can get into reasons why that is not what I feel like the Academy is about and why I don't do it anymore. But anyhow, at end of 2021, I managed to find my way out after applying for 40 jobs and into the role that I have now. So let's talk through this, this little story of my life as an academic, because I think it will kind of maybe give you a little bit of a context that may help frame other threads of this conversation. So about a year into my PhD, I completely changed my topic entirely and irrevocably throughout almost everything. And then I went part-time about the time I should be finishing. And then I took on effectively full-time work teaching. It took me like 6 years to get a publication, any publication. And then I kind of got really angry about everything and went into a very significant open science vigilante phase that lasted a number of years. It's not saying that I don't care about open science. I still very much do, and I very much advocate for open science to this day. It's just that, I had a different tone to how I did that, and I denounce and reject that part of me. I got in late 2018 my first and only first author publication. To this day, I still only have one first author paper to my name. And then I got very, very significantly burnt out to the point that, I was like waking up angry before going to work. That's not something I recommend for anyone. And then, in late 2020, I got my first and only external grant success. You might wonder how that happens with only one first author publication, and that's you have really great collaborators and they do all the heavy lifting. That was a New Zealand foundation. It was great. It's a great project. I'm really sad that I'm not actually working on it more seriously. I don't know what happened there. That's a really annoying structural thing. Anyhow, so this is an alternative context. So, so in late 2013, when my PhD is meant to end, things aren't going as well as I should, I decided to have income instead, and so I went part-time. Through that period outlined there from 2014 to 2017, I basically ran all of third year at Deakin. Every single unit at some point, I chaired that unit. It was unhealthy, but it, again, gave me income. In late 2016, I got appointed to Reimagine first year, and kind of this led into this whole period overall where in 2017, I formed a lab because overall I got really sick of everything and I tried to fix the academy. Then around 2018, 2019, with Fiona and others, we founded Anzon and Amos to try to kind of support other things to kind of help people, you know, be a little bit more proactive in improving their research practices. I got an invited keynote in 2019. That was nice. Only time that's really happened. And then I decided to quit. And in that period, the green section that shouldn't have popped up now, that's the section where I suddenly hit the stride. And this is the section where I've had 10 plus papers per year. So that's why I've done this. Is it's one part for framing to kind of give a little bit of a picture that one, you could look at my career very sadly and it would be true. And you could look at my career in a little bit more positive line and that would also be true. And that's important for the purposes of the later section of this talk, where I'm trying to kind of equip you, for those of you who are interested in at least considering going out of the academy. You can have a really sad view of your academic life history and still have a very, very impressive life history for you to talk about in the context of applying for work. Because the lens on the story that you're reviewing really makes a big difference. And I will try and thread this through a little bit more as we go along. Nothing you do in the academy makes sense to anyone outside the academy. Everyone in the academy is a strange little wizard, is the way that I've taken to describing this, with strange wizard powers that are unknowable to people outside. You engage in unusual rituals many times a year, multiple times a year. As a completed academic, you will dress up in funny robes and hats and walk around and proceed through ornate rituals. You're strange wizards to everyone outside. And it's important to keep that in context. And when thinking about then how do you talk about that story, all of the things in the first slide, we're saying, oh, I didn't do this, this is a bad thing. None of those like evaluative standards that are implicit to that make sense to anyone outside the academy, because they don't have any of the experiences that would make that make sense, most of them. All right. So retrospectively, there are a whole bunch of experiences, and I'm going to emphasize here that many of these experiences were not pictured anywhere on either of those timelines. These are the things that are retrospectively important in my academic career that I think have been important for my ability to, one, get the job that I have, but two, be good at the job that I have. And I feel quite confident in saying, despite the fact that I know I'm extrapolating from a very small data set here, that having seen what work is like outside the academy, I would say that these are very sensible things for you to kind of see, okay, maybe I could think about how I might pull from these threads. So one thing I did a little bit of is consulting. And I don't want to say I worked for, you know, a big four consulting firm. No, I didn't. I found opportunities to work on small and narrow evaluation or research projects for someone else for money at certain points along my PhD journey. So I did some analysis work for equity and diversity for the university. They collect a lot of survey data and they had no idea what to do with it. So I spent a couple of days learning how to use pivot tables for the first time and produced a bucket load of tests and tables for them, which they were grossly appreciative of, but it also gave me a lot of opportunity about what it's like to work with other people's data in the context of answering questions that I didn't have control of and I didn't set up. And also it's equity and diversity. So if I wanted to move into a non-profit sector, I've got something else to tag on my career. I had a very, very minimal role in consulting on a project for the Department of Education and Training. I also did some work for a private school network that I won't name in late 2021 to just support them through their research. And again, it's that ability for me to talk about the ability to do research projects or research adjacent work that definitely parlayed the skills that I learned as an academic, but exist outside the rituals of academia that no one else understands. Because if I can say, I helped equity and diversity process their data and provide insights about their equity and diversity initiatives in a university, that makes sense to most organizations in ways that name any of your last papers that you've been working on probably don't, unfortunately. Additionally, forming groups, great opportunity to kind of learn some skills around how to, understand how to work with other people that aren't just, again, the same people that you're working on for your research projects that are motivated by entirely the same things. So again, forming a lab allowed us to kind of develop, have context to develop procedures and policies and frameworks that, again, supported and, again, help us develop a really good story about the skills I have for following and adhering to research procedures. Hands-on as a community of practice and AMOS as a society, all of these things are really good resources, again, to talk about my ability to work with other people. And again, the same sort of things. It doesn't have to be a big group, it doesn't have to be a research group. You are privileged to exist in a wonderful group by all accounts. Forming an interest society within like an interest group within a academic society, same sort of thing. Or working on a particular society's conference or something like that. It's good opportunities to get those same sort of experiences. I contributed to an open letter on collection of high quality sex and gender data in the English and Welsh census, which again, I think one spoke to my ability to engage with a different component of society in addition to being, just a good, right thing to do. Writing R packages, super useful skill to always have, again, has paid off in spades, moving into an organization that their data analysis system was Excel when I arrived, and now is not, distinctively, thank God. Teaching and leading units, explaining complex ideas to people who are varying levels of interested, and helping them develop that interest. And I guess to a very, very minimal extent, writing papers has been somewhat useful, a little bit. But I want to emphasize that's very, very low down on the prioritization of useful skills. So I really want to focus on some things that I think are useful for people who are leaving the academy to learn. I've entirely lost track of where I'm up to. Cool, excellent. Any questions at this point? I should think I'm just kind of barraging you with content, and I feel bad about that. Excellent, great. So here are some things that I think are useful to learn if you are thinking, or you're at this stage and you're unsure about where you want to go. The outside is a much bigger place than the inside. This is kind of not particularly interesting. That may or may not be a surprising revelation to you, but I feel like sometimes it's one of these things that just because the way the academy works is you end up spending a lot of time only talking to other academics, you lose perspective about how big the rest of the world is. I had this realization that I don't really know a lot of people that aren't academics, or at some point they were the only people I interacted with. And when that happens, it becomes really hard to get this idea that, there aren't that many jobs offered in the academy every year. And there are kind of a lot of you, when you are only a small slice of all the people that are graduating, there are a lot of other organizations, employers, and jobs. So there are lots more opportunities outside than there are inside. One of the things I have heard so many times from my department heads, and it drives me up the wall, particularly in retrospect, is academics are paid so well. And that is true relative to a PhD student. But the reality is that academics are not actually paid very well at all relative to what had happened if, say, for example, you had got a job at any point prior and just continued moving up the ladder. Because and that is, again, the outside is much bigger. That's a lot of people. A lot of people maybe did an undergraduate degree, got into a public service job, and are like pushing towards department heads while you've been tinkering away at your PhD. So you'll be poor for a really long time as a student, but then suddenly you'll have an upkick in your income and you'll feel like you are astonishingly wealthy. Having a chat about Sasha about, suddenly having an income and going, oh my God, I have money and that's nice. And that is unequivocally true, but the issue is that you need to not fool yourself into thinking that because of that feeling, in an absolute sense, you are being paid well, because the reality is you're all right, you're being paid okay. Teachers are being paid pretty well at that stage as well. So, you know, and they complain about not being paid well. So that should maybe help you. You will chronically undervalue, every single one of you will undervalue yourself almost exclusively as a function of the fact that you are surrounded by people with the same skills and experience. Everyone here, show of hands who feels some element of imposter syndrome. Don't lie to me. I still assert that imposter syndrome is good for you because it encourages you to be critical about your own capacity. I think that's healthy. But at the same time, you are all broken by this because each one of you knows probably, there is no one here that is probably the best at every single thing. And there are so many of you that are so overlapping in their skill set, and this is the common experience of the academy. You just think if all the ways that you are not the best means that you are the worst relative to the rest of society. And that is entirely untrue because the rest of society hasn't spent all this time learning all of the dumb things you've had to learn as part of your wizard school. Yeah. You will internalize all of these weird sort of evaluation standards that you need to break yourself of, because most of the people that you would work for, that I work with in outside context, didn't do much past a bachelor's degree. That's not a negative thing for them at all. They're brilliant at what they do. They didn't need to do all that to be brilliant, but you have also done all these additional things to make you brilliant in ways that they have no understanding of. Again, like the wizard thing is not only pejorative, like you're a strange wizard, but you are strange wizards with dark powers, yeah? So this kind of gets into this point that any stage in your PhD, and this is not saying leave your PhD at any stage, by no account am I saying that under any circumstance, but I'm just saying at any stage in your PhD, you do have skills that employers need, because overwhelmingly there are things that you are learning along the way that you don't realize that you're learning, because that's kind of, again, you're surrounded by people that know more than you because they're like at least, you know, half a year ahead of you or many, many decades ahead of you in this process. And so you feel small relative to them. But again, relative to everyone who didn't start that process, didn't do honors, didn't start a PhD, you have learnt so many things relative to them that they don't know, that they will know nothing of. They don't even understand what that thing is called, right? All those things are skills that, with some framing and some persuasion, your employers need. My employer didn't know that they needed R developers, but now they have at least 3 because they desperately needed it, because quarterly reporting was taking 2 people 4 weeks of running SQL queries and then copying and pasting Excel tables and pivot charts and then manually editing things. In half a year, we had to do some recruitment and restructuring. We basically turned all of those things into markdown reports that we press play, sit back and twiddle our thumbs for a couple of days just to make it look like we're not just doing nothing for the rest of the time. We spend that time improving the reports. I want to make it clear. Here's another hard piece of knowledge. You are functionally interchangeable to the academy. This is a sad piece of knowledge. My colleagues, the ones that I liked in the academy, in my old job at Deakin, were very sad that I was leaving. They were saying, we don't know how we're going to replace you. Like, you know how to do these weird arcane rituals that only you know how to do. And you've been so influential in these teaching things, blah, blah, blah. I left and my employer did not replace my position for 6 to 12 months, and they did not replace that position with anyone with any of that same skill set. No research methods, no none of that teaching expertise. That was not relevant. You are interchangeable. I was interchangeable, no matter how much my colleagues thought I was valuable to my employer. No, you are a person that produces papers and sits in a classroom and lets students pass. Yeah. So you are functionally interchangeable in that capacity to the academy. Yeah. Sorry, didn't realize it was going to get that hard, but I need to say it at some point, right? Oh, this is something I think we need to kind of, this goes back right to that first point. You need to think about expected value, right? So kind of linking into this idea that we said at the start that, you're being paid so well and the outside is much bigger. You need to think about how many academic positions, entry-level academic positions you have seen advertised in the last year across all of the universities in Victoria, for argument's sake, assuming you're not willing to move, which, maybe you are. Then think about how many PhD students will graduate this year from Melbourne alone. And then think about what that means if every other institute is graduating, an approximation of that same amount, given how many jobs there are. Yeah. So if you think about that income that you might earn in that context against the likelihood of an outcome of getting one of those jobs versus maybe slightly lower income that you might get in a job outside, right? Maybe slightly lower, not guaranteed slightly lower, let's be 100% honest, versus how much more likely it is you might get a job in any of those enormous number of other jobs. It's worth considering how much opportunity there is for goodwill, because what I can absolutely say, having an income is good for you. As a mental health a person who works in a mental health provider, significant course of, mental health presentations, housing and homelessness challenges, etc., low income, right? So having an income is good for you. It's a best intervention I can recommend for your mental health and well-being, have an income. So this is a smart group of people. Think about expected value. So what I want to say about your employable skills, one of the best things I can say, which again, it's a magic thing that, again, it doesn't make sense to you because everyone around you is full of the same sort of skills here, but you take yourself out and put yourself in most other workplace contexts, you will find that these things are surprising. You are imbued with a natural tendency towards justified cynicism. Every time you see a claim made, you are cynical about that claim and you want to verify that. And you want to understand how you can know those things, because you understand that knowing things, by God, don't you all know this, knowing things is incredibly hard. No one else outside thinks knowing things is hard. They think knowing things is easy. I look outside, the sky is blue, right? The reality is that, that cursed number I said earlier about we had more than 30,000 people that we served last year. To answer that question took me several weeks and concerted effort. I had to write SQL queries. I had to call people. I had to send out email surveys. I had to think, because answering the question about how many people we are served is a non-trivial question, right? And I know that that's a non-trivial question, but the CEO sure as hell doesn't. He expects that there's a really easy way for us to answer that question. There's an even more cursed thing is I can't reliably tell you on any day how many services we have without probably calling every single state manager and saying, how many services are you managing? So again, like when you come in with the lens that you have and the skills you've developed, you know that things are hard to know and you know how to know them, right? You may not know 100% how to measure things, but you know exactly how you might start to unpick things, both like descriptively, but also inferentially. How are things related? Can we know that things are actually, we are having an impact, right? You are, again, able to measure. You know what it is to measure, how to measure things, how not to measure things, what mistakes you can make with designing a measurement. You feel comfortable with data. Again, relative to each other, I feel like you will say, I'm not very comfortable with data. Some of you will feel uncomfortable with data. But again, relative to, okay, I'll go back a second and say, many of the people that I work with have got a bachelor's degree or maybe a master's in social work or something like that. The last time they had to do anything to do with data was maybe in year 12. So everything you have learned about data since year 12 is probably going to be an edge over most people that you will be employed with, right? So your comfort with your discomfort with data is the discomfort with the data that you work with, not the discomfort with data that everyone else experiences in the world, which is way more profound than you were aware of. You have data skills. Again, my team, when I arrived, was working with Excel and doing amazing things that no one else could. So if you can do amazing things with Excel, by the standards of industry, you have amazing data skills. And when I say do things with Excel, I'm saying make a pivot chart, make a pivot table, do some grouped sums. That is the scale of, because again, if no one else has done any data past year 12, why would they know how to do any of those things unless they're an accountant, right? So those types of things, you think data skills starts when you're talking about, oh, I can work with a data set that is too large to store in memory, and I can do some really complex, again, weird rituals. No one understands what that is. Doesn't even understand that that's a thing yet. Yeah. You can read and follow detailed and arcane procedures, rituals, right? I started at Nemi and I had never drawn a choropleth, and I realized it would be useful, and I looked it up and I learned how to do it. And I'm pretty sure if that applies to any of you, you could probably do that inside half a day as well, because that's pretty much the PhD experience. Oh, I'm working along, I hit a problem, I don't know how to solve a problem. I don't know what to do. I'll just read about it and learn how to solve that problem. And you do that again and again and again, and eventually you submit a PhD thesis. Yeah. In the industry, when you hit that problem, you call in consultants or you go off to a training course, which is another fun thing about working outside, is that if I said to my boss, I think I'd like to learn, insert anything, basically arbitrary as hell. I want to learn about, I don't know, I want to do a 5-day course in Python and developing, better make pipelines and blah, blah, blah. They would pay for it. The organization would pay for it in a heartbeat. I also don't have to book my own flights, book my own hotels. I don't have to get reimbursed for things. I get cab charges to get to the airport when I have to travel. Just trying to see these things out there. Working outside the academy is pretty great. You can deal with complexity and talk it through. Again, you have a habit of talking to other wizards about this, but in practice, is anyone here first in family to go into post-undergrad level or University of Melbourne? Okay, no, great. So, I mean, you've spoken to family, perhaps reluctantly, about, what you're doing and trying to explain it. That is a huge skill. And if you've taught any undergrad classes, again, great skill. Most people don't have it, because why would they ever develop it? Most of the world is immediate and obvious to them because the world is easy. Knowledge is easy for most people because they think it's easy. Yeah. And you have the ability to learn and improve processes, because again, if you didn't, you couldn't finish a PhD thesis. The journey is too hard for you to just do things manually and bluntly. You have to innovate and work out processes to make it work. Yeah. So all of these things make you grossly employable. You just need to work out how to translate that into language that other people understand. Yeah. So when looking for jobs, I try to frame this, because I've taken it as my journey, my job now, sub-job, to kind of help other people get out, because I know other people are in that state where they're unsure for similar reasons to me, or again, there just aren't enough jobs and they're on soft money. I'm trying to work on this idea that you need to translate your skills that you have into the process of you getting a new job that can also use the skills that you have. So starting for an obvious one, looking for jobs outside is like doing a lit review, right? Very simple. This one maps very simply. You just need to build sensible search alerts, understand what your inclusion and exclusion criteria are. For me, when I started looking for jobs, I was thinking I would work for a nonprofit or a government department. What I absolutely said I would not work for is sports bet. 100% off the table. And that's useful to know that and know what those things are, because it can help you process this when you have to read hundreds and hundreds of PDs to work out which of them are actually going to be useful. Same as you're doing systematic review. I'm going to burn through this much faster. Pick your databases, understand where you might look. Again, things like APS, VPS jobs are a great option. Put in your search terms for post-academics, things like data, research, evaluation, user interface, user experience, project, consult, education, training, all really useful things. When I say project, I mean, this is me trying to softly emphasize the idea that if you are late in this stage, you should put the word manager in your search because you are a project or a team manager or both. That's horrific to you, but true for the world, right? Sorry, Sasha has a slide, so he can give them to you later. If you are applying for a job, this is the thing that you will not like. You must absolutely call the person listed every single time. 100% of the time, you must call them, right? You'll need to work out what questions you want to ask them. So you don't just say, I think I have to call you, but you must call them 100% because it helps you understand a little bit more about the job. It puts your name in their head and it helps you kind of understand what additional things you need to do with your cover letter and your key selection criteria to make yourself and your CV to make yourself more appealing to them. Another thing is you must know what you are worth. In the context of the academy, you're just stepping up a chain, right? And it makes it easy for you to lose perspective about how much your time is worth. All employers are competing for the same pool of people broadly. So the only thing you can reliably use to know that they are competing for someone of a particular ability is to know how much money, right, they're willing to pay, because that will be a discriminator that should work across all sorts of fields, right? So if in doubt, use the public service criteria. This is a guideline on how this might work. So if you're, post fourth year, you're around 63 to 75,000, easy. If you're midway through your PhD, up to 96 without an issue, right? And then so on and so forth. And then that should map across other industries, understanding that for-profits will pay more, non-for-profits will pay less, but you may get salary sacrificing benefits like I do, which are useful. Reading a PD. PDs are horrifying. They're scary things. Key thing to note is if you wrote the key selection responsibilities of your PhD now and then gave it to you as an honours student, you would not apply for your PhD, 100%. Because there are things that you have had to learn that are horrifying and scary that you have learned, but you don't think you could do it. That's exactly what the key responsibilities are. They're things that you will do in the job, not things you already know how to do. That stuff is in your key selection criteria, but they're still ideal. So you need to channel your, mediocre cis white man and just apply for shit if you meet most of the criteria. And it's okay for you to say, oh, I've done something like this, it's like this. Don't say it in the wishy-washy terms, but shape your experience to make it fit what they're looking for. That's totally fine. They're not looking for someone who checks the box perfectly. They don't know what they're looking for. They're wanting someone who can do the key responsibilities, and it's your job to persuade them that you can. Yeah. Also, if there's a required knowledge section and you don't have it, we're all nerds here, cram, right? I applied for a job that required more psychometric stuff that I hadn't learned before. I spent a weekend, I wrote some R code. I walked out of that weekend feeling like I could absolutely do that job. Done. Didn't have any experience of that beforehand. So you can do that too. That's totally no requirement for you to, have done a degree in X or Y. That's not how the rest of the world works. No one cares about degrees. All right. All right, so writing a CV and a cover letter. These documents are not like lists, not lists. Don't write CV lists, right? They're like papers that are arguing you should be employed in a role. Everything you have as an experience or any qualification are data or evidence that you should cite in the context of what you're arguing for, yeah? I am sick of seeing things that are just like, here is every paper that I've ever written. No one cares about the list thing. They want to understand what that list is telling them about you as vis-a-vis your ability to do those key responsibilities. So each application that you do might use similar or the same papers, citations, etc. In the same way that you're writing a paper, you might use the same things, but they use them in different ways. Yeah. So in the same way, don't fall into this thing of just listing everything. Just be a little bit more targeted about how you're saying, I did this and it taught me this, and that means I can do what you want me to do. Importantly, throw out your academic CV, and this is good because we're managed to catch back on time. I'm going to need a break after this. You need to throw out your academic CV. Absolutely, I know things. I'm not saying don't cite the papers you've done or don't acknowledge grants, but absolutely do not put them in the format that you will put them if you were applying for an academic job. In an academic job, they want you to get grants and publish papers. So the way that you evidence that is show them, I have got grants and I've published a lot of papers. No one else cares about those metrics. Don't present them in that way. Use each individual thing as a story. I would put a couple of papers in my CVs, and again, CVs multiple. I wrote, again, 30 of them. I would use certain papers tailored to what I was applying for to build a picture of my ability to do certain things. But I would put like the title and then an explanation. I can't do that for all of the papers I might have had, even though I didn't have nearly as many of you will have, because again, but that's not the point. That wouldn't have helped me. You need to be a little bit more targeted, because they're not going to spend that much time reading them anyhow. So importantly, don't write something that says like PhD from 2003 to 2008, learnability, representation, and language, a Bayesian approach. Instead, say something like, I led a 5-year project, including literature review, study design, data management, policy compliance, et cetera, right? So when you say policy compliance, you did an ethics review. If you collected any human data, that is an important skill that you have completely forgotten that most people have never done and don't know anything about. And that generalizes phenomenally well. So just keep these things in mind. You need to think about those atomic elements of the work that you've been doing, and those atomic elements will map into other people's jobs way better than you expect. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me. Give me questions. Andy.
Yeah, Andy, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, if no one else has a question, I just, this is really great and informative. Thank you. I was just wondering if you could sort of speak to, do you find that people kind of know what they're getting if they hire someone out of academia, or were there a lot of like misapprehensions about, you know, like what you could do or what you'd be like, you know, like, do they think all people with PhDs are like pretentious jerks, or, you know,
funny wizards?
Yeah.
I mean, I had a conversation with someone when I was striking out a lot with job applications about this, and they definitely emphasized they'd had a long career in the public service, and they emphasized that they do hire academics, but historically they find that they get mixed results in that. And part of that is, one, not understanding the need to transition gear, but also that they kind of don't understand what they're getting. And sometimes they hire an academic or an ex-academic as being an ex-academic, and then they put them into a non-academic shaped role and expect them to still be that person, but not in that same role. And that makes sense. And that would lead to bad outcomes. By and large, I don't think anyone has an understanding about what PhD graduates can offer them, or even like late stage PhD candidates can offer them. So I don't know that they know what they're looking for, if that answers your question. That's not to say that, I think this is the thing that I think the recommendation I would give, rather than be concerned about that, is work out, how do I make myself fit the role that they're looking for, rather than expect that people are going to hire me just because I have a PhD, because they're totally not, because I don't even understand what that means. Again, it's a weird ritual. So for me, again, and I got more success as I went on, like at least I got offers at the end. I stopped, like I would include my PhD there, but I wouldn't talk about myself as being a PhD holder per se, if that would make sense. That I would talk about myself as a lead data scientist, or a research leader, or a team leader, or project leader. And I would, again, it's that thing about shaping your experience in terms of like on my CV, I would have a headline section where it'd say like, this is what I am. Because again, that's helpful. Sometimes people need a heuristic to kind of pass what they're looking at. And I would change that headline based on what job. And I would try and make it look, if not 100%, very close to what the position title was, while being true about what my experiences are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you said writing papers didn't help you much, because to me that sounds very much like what you're doing when you're writing papers is the key that makes a good paper is the story.
Oh,
And, yeah, it's the sort of story you're telling to them, you're telling it in their language, and that's the key.
yeah, sorry, I should clarify that was poorly expressed on me by me. I'm not saying that writing papers is not, because that's exactly true. Like that ability to tell a story from the data that you have is really important in that application process. What I will say is that writing papers development, the skill development in terms of what it does for my ability in my job, minimal, because I don't write papers anymore.
That sounds lovely. All right.
Yeah. No, and I mean, yeah, I take it everyone saw the things could be better preprint that went around. No, okay. Well, if you find that one, that's a glorious thing about how things could be better if you didn't have to write papers in the way that we do. Yeah, no, I mean, it's not to say that there's nothing out of that. Like my long time supervising students and again contributing to papers means that like I am an editing machine relative to my peers, that my co-workers, that they don't understand how I can do that. That's that experience. But in terms of the grunt of writing a paper, no, it's not useful to my skill set now.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. So actually, I just want to ask, like, because I heard that after the PhD, it's really hard to get job as compared to if you like master and bachelor. Am I right?
I don't know. I don't have the data to assess that. I would say that I think that there's the risk, and I think it goes into the thing I was telling you about the person I spoke to. I think if you are trying to apply for a job based on I have a PhD versus I have a master's or a bachelor's, then yes, it will be harder, because I think you invoke stereotypes about the sort of person that says I have a PhD. And again, at some point, someone starts seeing you walking on HAG with a tutor bonnet and saying, I don't know what that person can do for me. Whereas they know they employ people with bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, and they can understand what that is. So I'd say in principle, if you're not careful, yes, it could be harder, but in practice, it shouldn't be, because you absolutely know things that definitely bachelor's degree completing students are unlikely to know. And if you can tell that story about those elements of your skills, you should be better positioned to succeed in future job applications. Plus, you've got more work experience. You just need to remember that your PhD is work, and any side projects you work on are also work. Yeah. Don't be alienated from your labor, right? Everything you're doing is jobs, right? You just may not be being paid for them.
Actually, this will probably recommend the skip.
Yeah, maybe the last one.
Okay. Great presentation, answered lots of questions. I just wanted to ask what your opinion was in relation to the rising AIs in media, because in academia, it's like a hot topic right now. And I understand, like, if we talk about, like, for instance, ChatGPT and like how it's being used right now for coding help, do you think, I know it's hard to determine, but would you think that will potentially impact the job market in this kind of jobs for?
Yeah, absolutely will affect them. It won't affect them in the, like, don't believe anything that says these jobs are going to disappear, because like I said, I've gone from having a team that had no like coding expertise to a small group that have an okay grasp. One of my team members has a really strong habit of just trying to chat GPT his way through code problems. And I mean, it makes him faster, but the issue is that he hits roadblocks that he can't navigate around because he doesn't understand how to think through the problem strategically, the things that you learn trying to deal with complex problems that your coding is having to do with. I mean, try and get ChatGPT to write the code for your major research projects. Like, it can't do it. You can't express that clearly enough. So I think there will definitely be shifts because of it, because people will try and cut corners. But in the end, like, you just can't, at this point in time, I don't think there's any reasonable expectation you can replace a human in that capacity. In the same way that I don't like same issues with everything about AI disruption. There will be changes, and some of those will be bad, some of those will be good, but I just don't think it's going to be at this stage the bigger changes are going to be people's responses to it rather than AI itself's impact.
Great. I might call it there. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Matthew, for speaking.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Really great.